Good afternoon, and apologies for my voice is a little hoarse. I caught something on the plane, so it's a bit of a chest and cough to deal with. But I'd like to start by thanking His Highness Sheikh Ahmed bin Saeed Al Maktoum, Mr. Ghassan, and the conference organizers for the honor and opportunity to address you today. So the title I was given for this session was Big Bucks. How big is the business potential of accessible tourism? But as most men, and perhaps some women might tell you, it's not all about size. Size does matter, of course, but there are 5 other important reasons why now is the time to focus on inclusive tourism. I've taken this slide from a good friend and close colleague of mine, Carolyn Childs, who is my regular guest lecturer when I give training to the Global Sustainable Tourism Council. Is it a market that's growing? Are you looking for a one-off transaction or customer loyalty? Is it accessible and inclusive tourism something that will benefit your brand and make your company an attractive place to work at and invest in? And how hotly contested a space is this? Well, the market is neither small nor niche. Disability occurs everywhere and cuts across all market segments. The global annual spending by disabled consumers, that's about 1.3 billion people, or 16% of the world's population, is estimated to be about $13 trillion. Yet most brands fail to effectively engage with this market and are missing out on a major opportunity. Visit Britain's groundbreaking 2014 Purple Pound survey found that the contribution to tourism of people with access needs and members of their party was £12.4 billion. By 2023, it was £14.6 billion, or 24% of overnight trips and 20% of day trips. A 2021 Austrade study estimated the value of accessible tourism to Australia at $13.5 billion. The Open Doors organization has conducted 4 market studies since 2002 into the travel patterns of Americans with disability, and the annual spend has risen dramatically, in 2018 reaching a staggering $58.7 billion. A more recent study by MMGY Global in 2022 found that US travelers with mobility impairments alone spend $58.2 billion annually on travel and take the same number of trips as able-bodied individuals. What's more, survey after survey has shown that people with access needs would travel more if they were given more opportunities by transport providers, accommodation providers, and tourist attractions. Here are some more recent Australian figures from a 2024 study based on the figures from June 2023 quarter alone. This multiplies out to an annual amount more than double the figure in 2021. So what's happened in these 2 years? Part of the answer is that the 2021 survey counted people with disability or a long-term health condition, while what is being counted here are travelers with accessibility needs. This survey also revealed that around a quarter of international travelers considering Australia have an accessibility need, and a massive 86% said that accessibility influences their choice of destination. Following Visit Britain's methodology, Austrade also looked at the contribution of this market segment and, surprise, surprise, it aligns closely with Visit Britain and also with the percentage of people in each country with disability. That is about 20%. It accounts for 20% of all tourism revenue. And I have a simple question. Why would any business discount themselves from a fifth of the market? Any changes the business can make to further tap into this market is guaranteed to increase revenue. And many of these changes can be immediate and either cheap or virtually cost-free. And I'll give you just one example. Having your menus, service menus, information pamphlets, and so on available via a QR code won't just benefit the blind and low vision communities. You will find that people in their 50s and 60s will be very happy too, especially if they've left their reading glasses at home. For people like me with limited dexterity, reading things on my device would always be my first choice. And having 3 children in their 20s at home, I have no doubt that people of that generation would gravitate to that option too. So having a QR code is actually a great example of universal design, or the curb cut effect, whereby if modifications are made for the benefit of disabled populations, everyone will benefit. Other examples are closed captions and keyboards, which were both invented for the deaf and blind communities respectively, but are now truly universal. Again, following the lead of Visit Britain, the Austrade survey looked at the breakdown of travellers with accessibility needs, and just 1% of them need to use a wheelchair. Businesses are often put off from pursuing this market because they think it means major capital expenditure. This is simply not true, because not every person with a disability is a wheelchair user who needs accessible bathrooms and level entry. You can see from this graph that literally every other group is larger. This doesn't mean that wheelchair users' needs should be ignored, just that there are other groups whose needs can be met easily and in some cases instantaneously. One thing that I find interesting on this graph is that the largest category of people, 7.5%, are those with food or chemical intolerances. It's become normalized, even a marketing strategy, to advertise gluten and lactose-free food, just as it has to mention vegetarian and vegan options. What I would like to see is accessibility features being used in the same way, as a marketing tool, a unique selling point, something that will bring in business and make you the envy of your competitors. And in this case, all operators have to do is switch to hypoallergenic products or offer them as an alternative. And then, of course, tell people about it. The other interesting thing on this page is a graphic illustration of the multiplier effect. Just 30% of people with accessibility needs travel alone. More than 40% travel with friends and family. So if I can't get in somewhere and I'm traveling with my family, you don't lose the business of one person, you lose the business of 5 people. It's often thought that people with disability can't afford to travel. That's simply not true, as we've seen. The Visit Britain studies show that travellers who identify as disabled stay longer and therefore spend more than the average traveller. So it turns out that far from being at the lower end of the market, the disabled traveller is actually a high-value tourist. One thing is for certain, every one of us is aging. In the words of Greg van der Heyden, who developed the first WCAG guidelines, we will all develop disabilities one day unless we die first. In English, the polite way of saying it is that as you age, your faculties fade. But the reality is that as people age, they will inevitably acquire disabilities and have increasing accessibility needs. According to the European Network for Accessible Tourism, the inclusive travel market segment is already made up of 65% seniors and 35% people with disability. What we can see from this graph is that the aged population is set to grow enormously. Right now, just about 10% of the world's population is over 65. In 25 years, that proportion will rise to 16%, which equates to 2.1 billion people. And by 2100, to 25%. So why is this important? Although seniors are unlikely to identify as disabled, almost 40% of people will retire with an acquired disability. The Australian Bureau of Statistics reports that more than half of over 65s have an acquired disability. The ABS also predicts that the number of Australians over 85 is predicted to double from its 2018 level to over 1 million people by 2042. And at that age, more than 75% of people will have an acquired disability. And these trends are replicated around the world, as you can see from this graph. So it's not just that the market is growing rapidly. Any tourism business that wants to sustain itself into the future will have to cater to this aging demographic with its increasing access needs, or it will fail. And of course, the other hidden benefit of tapping into this market is that it is an incredibly loyal one. Because people with disability or having access needs are so often disappointed, when we find somewhere that suits our needs, we come back again and again. Not only that, we tell our friends and communities about our positive experiences and generate new business. But of course, we also share our bad experiences, which can have serious effects on a brand's reputation and bottom line. I doubt there's any community where word of mouth is more important than the disabled community. And another hidden benefit is that, like seniors, people with disability tend to travel in shoulder and off seasons. So businesses can extend their high seasons and bring in more revenue during off seasons simply by catering better to people with access needs. And it's 2025, so of course there are influencers. There are dozens of accessible travel bloggers, some of them incredibly successful with large followings, such as Corey, Sylvia, and John, 3 friends of mine who are the world's leading wheelchair bloggers. As we're all aware, familiarization trips, or FAMILs, are a central part of marketing in the tourism industry, aimed at showing influencers or bloggers or journalists that your service is offering an attractive service to their readership and networks. This is even more relevant to people with access needs. Because people with disability are often disappointed by a provider's ability to meet their needs, reading about another person's direct experience is hugely reassuring. That's why Costa Brava, a leader in this area for many, many years, has hosted me and several other travel bloggers. So, like word of mouth, familiarization trips are way more important in this segment than any other, because reading about the direct experience of someone who has actually been somewhere and seeing their photos and videos is so much more important to people with access needs. The Valuable 500 conducted a survey of 3,500 people with disability in 5 countries in 2022. There were dozens of questions in this survey. I haven't got time to go into them. I'll just look at one. What do disabled people like to do on holiday? Well, I asked ChatGPT to give me a table of what people like to do on holiday, and the results are remarkably similar. Disabled travelers like to do exactly the same things as everybody else. I started work as Lonely Planet's accessible travel manager in 2014 and attended the first Destinations for All conference in Montreal in the same year. A few forward-thinking DMOs, notably the UK, Spain, Flanders, and Germany, were already making progress. But it was really after the UNWTO declared World Tourism Day to Tourism for All in 2016 that interest really took off. Significantly, post-COVID, 2 of the world's biggest NGOs in tourism, the UNWTO and WTTC, put the spotlight firmly on accessible tourism in the recovery phase. 4 years later, the tourism industry has clearly woken up to the business potential, with the UK aiming to be Europe's most accessible destination by the end of this year. It was particularly frustrating for me as an Australian that Australia had paid so little attention to this area pre-COVID. However, post-COVID, there was an explosion of interest sparked by Tourism Australia gathering together leading inclusive travel advocates, including myself, to begin formulating their accessible and inclusive tourism strategy. I was directly involved in 2 initiatives following that in that same year, one under the auspices of APEC, and the other to develop a training program for Tourism Australia. Just 2 years later, Queensland declared 2023 the year of accessible tourism, and Tourism Australia commissioned another training framework for small businesses. And now, Tourism Australia lists accessible as one of 3 foundational elements to underpin their growth strategy. So the time to act is now, while the market is still relatively uncontested. And finally, there's the not inconsiderable benefit of making your business and brand more attractive to employees. Younger generations in particular are looking to work for organizations that align with their values and have strong CSR policies. 76% of millennials look for employers based on their CSR, while 64% of millennials won't take a job unless their employer has a strong CSR record. Not only will you attract more candidates in a tight job market, you'll also retain them more easily, resulting in increased productivity and profitability, and also much lower absenteeism. What's more, PwC's 2022 Global Investor Survey suggests that more than a quarter of investors said they were willing to accept a lower rate of return on investment from a company that does activities benefiting society and the environment. I managed to make that less than 15 minutes. Thank you very much. If there are times or any questions, I'm happy to take them.
So any questions? Any questions for Martin?
This was a very insightful presentation. My name is Dragana. I'm working for, you can hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for this insightful presentation. My name is Dragana. I'm working for the Nata Travel Group, and accessibility is something that we are really keen to actually make it more accessible to the customers. Because I noticed in a lot of hotel platforms, it's actually not so easy to find the information, especially, okay, sometimes you will find on the physical disability if the place has the wheelchairs or is it wheelchair accessible, but for hidden disabilities, especially what you have mentioned for older generations, for food intolerance, it's really not easy to filter. Of course, I know you said the word of mouth and social media and all these groups are great resource, but what would you recommend for travel companies and agencies and even online platforms like booking.com or similar? What could you recommend for them to basically improve access to information?
I'd say two things. First thing I would say is that survey after survey has shown that the main barrier to travel for people with access needs and disability is a lack of information, the main barrier. And my primary advice is to make that information available. If you're a business, particularly a bricks and mortar business, or any kind of travel business, have your information hosted under a dedicated accessibility tab on your website. Your first contact with your potential customers is always going to be on the web. So have all the information on your website under a dedicated accessibility tab or a plan your trip tab, not under frequently asked questions. The other thing is, if you're a business, have an accessibility statement or an access guide which lists all the accessibility features that you offer. It's not a question of build it and they will come. It's a question of build it, tell people, and then they will come. So you have to put the facilities in place, and then you have to make sure that people know about it. And the only way that people will know about it is if you tell them. And the main way of telling them is through promotional materials or through your website.
Thank you. Thank you, Martin.